Hi, thank you for coming out today. My name is Khyati Trehan. I'm from India, but I live here in Brooklyn now, and it's been about a year. And I'm something between like a graphic designer and a visual artist, and I really struggle with the little like tag or byline that should come under my name because I've been a lot of things. I've been a type design intern forever ago, like nothing fancy, just trying to learn something new, how to draw letter forms and spacing and metrics and interpolation. I've been a communication designer at IDEO, trying to wrap my head around strategy and research and the ambiguity that comes with briefs that sound like, what's the future of this? Or what should our business do next? And I've been a brand designer at Sovereign Objects, a creative collective founded by this amazing person called Karin Fiery, who used to be an MD at Collins. And with her, I got to work in teams where we built brands around worlds like this one, inspired by Spanish cafe culture, for a book discovery app called Tortulia. So there have been a bunch of other titles in the mix through the work that I've gotten to do for clients like Oscars and Apple and YouTube and Vogue and other like cool names. And now I work at the Google Creative Lab, where I've worked on visual systems for campaigns and films and products and lots of other exciting things. So you kind of get the idea. Like, I've had a pretty varied and restless career. But the one thing that's been consistent throughout is my parallel practice. It's the stuff I do while I'm doing all of this. And I feel like I need both at the same time to keep the juices flowing, because they also kind of feed off of each other. And my personal practice gives me time to like meddle and to reflect. And most importantly, it gives me lots and lots of freedom. And that freedom comes in a bunch of flavors. Like, the first one, of course, is like complete freedom, where I'm just doing stuff for myself. Like, I can test out new treatments without the pressure of like a deliverable. So I do a lot of 3D illustrations, and it tends to have this like particular finished look. So what if I turned it on its head and brought a more like handmade process by sketching over it and giving the render this like painterly, imperfect quality? Or what if I used 3D tools to make a very like 2D looking animation and kind of repurpose a tool to do what it wasn't exactly built out to do? So, if I was doing this traditionally, I'd have to draw the shadows, but in 3D, I could just, place the light in one corner and let it calculate the shadows. Or generative AI processes that kind of go beyond just writing a prompt and hitting enter and like kind of waiting to see what will come out at the other end. And I've deliberately been doing what I call the ping pong process, or like a back and forth between traditional tools and AI tools to kind of find my own workflow. So I might do some lettering, I might animate it, and then I might take the frames to an AI tool, and then I bring it back to the trusty motion software. So I've also been like throwing type in the mix as an additional variable, because AI isn't the best at treating a body of text right now, and that this kind of like serves as a little constraint or challenge. And sometimes I use this space for what feels like little diary entries, like I got this new bag and my Kindle finally fits perfectly in it, so I'm reading more and I have this like newfound love for ebooks. Or how, since working in big organizations, I feel like my life now kind of revolves around the calendar. So if we've like planned something outside of work even and it's not on the calendar, I may not show up to it because I've forgotten about it. Or what it's like to move to a new country and start over and buy a couch from Facebook Marketplace for like the 6th time and know it won't be my last time. And there are instances where a diary entry kind of extends into several entries. Like, I had this day at work that involved a lot of like thinking and heady conversations and strategy, and it was kind of saturating. And on a day like that, I usually just go back home and watch like Love Island or The Bachelor or something. But that day, I just kind of started doodling in 3D with no intention. And the only rule that I set for myself is like, I'm not going to think too much. I've done enough of that in the day. And I kind of treated it like automatic writing. And the piece just started taking on like this organic form that you see. And around that time, I'd read about ecotherapy, which is a type of therapeutic treatment involving guided outdoor activities in nature. But what was surprising is that even the act of making a synthetic version of natural forms, I found very relaxing, especially because I was doing it so slowly. So I keep coming back to this, now it feels like a ritual or a practice once in a while, as like this way to like doodle and unwind as a plan B if Bachelor doesn't have a new season. And then there's the other extreme flavor of freedom, that's a 50-50. This involves projects that are more brief-centric, but there's a little pocket of freedom in there, and I do these all the time. But I think editorial illustration bucket of work is kind of like a perfect example of that for me. Because they, of course, like accompany a text, there's a mission to reference, and there's a job to be done. But they also can't give away too much. Like, you have to tread the tension of figurative and abstract, and the art director and illustrator get to tag team and figure out what qualifies as a good middle. So we have a little bit of freedom in sliding across that scale. An example of a hard middle to figure, though, was this like piece for the New York Times book review of The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy-Paul. She digs into the power of thinking outside the brain, like how your brain isn't the only thinking vessel in your body, that we're like these networked organisms and we move in shifting environments, and these environments have the power to transform the way that we think, which was like such a fuzzy concept to wrap my head around. Like, how do I even begin visualizing this? So after noodling on the concept and a bunch of sketches and lots of reading, I ended up landing on a visual that populated the imagery with like sensory receptors and really inflated their proportions to communicate their role, and lit up parts of them as if they're like receiving information, like they're active. So not a scientific diagram at all, very abstract. So in this moment, it was really reassuring to get this feedback from the actual author. So thank you, Annie. And editorials are also such a great entry into rabbit holes that I may have never come across. Like, where else would I learn about bioelectricity, and that there's a bit of research that suggests you can like persuade this worm to grow a second head by just changing the electrical signals that are being like passed around the worm's cells, which is wild. And the essay was about that, but it was also about what that might mean for us as human beings and regenerating human cells. So I tried to do that in the illustration. And I've somehow found myself in the niche of editorials with a scientific bent, somehow. And this was a piece on the role of the mitochondria in autism research for Spectrum magazine. And the last one I want to show in this bucket is a recent one that I did for Wired magazine on analog computing. And I always finish an illustration or an editorial illustration project hoping that it'll communicate a little more or like a little differently to the text that accompanies it, and it'll like stay in people's minds and linger a little after they've moved on to the next thing. There's no way for me to find out if I'm successful in doing that, but this I think about often, so I wanted to drop it in. And between the stuff that I do for myself and the stuff I make for others, there's a third flavor of freedom in the work that I do for this client, who is my sister, Kavya. Obviously not very little anymore. She's grown up and super talented and way cooler than me, and she's a musician. She's still very much a client, but I can still boss her around a little bit. So it's like the perfect kind of freedom. And I know her work really well, and I do lots of like quick visuals if she needs to like post something the next day. But this particular project was super special because it wasn't just Kavya and I working together, but also my husband. So it was like a family affair. And we collaborated on the key art for her debut album, Know Me Better, which is a collection of like super personal songs where Kavya writes about who she is and who she wants to become. So we kind of made like a box of like clues or little Easter eggs that you'll find out more about when you listen to the song, and then we scattered them carefully around her. And there was some elements that extended into like other assets like gig announcements and fun limited edition merch that I own. And I also get to test like new canvases through her, like these background visuals I got to make for her Lollapalooza performance. And her set list for this particular performance had a lot of like warmth, but at the same time, she's like a super energetic performer. Like she scales across the stage or like dances a lot. So the visual direction tried to hit a spot in the middle, and I had to consider how the visuals would like frame her and support her performance and create like a visual impact given the scale of the stage. I couldn't be there, so I have these like receipts to show that it did happen. And I want to leave you with a little sneak peek into my next experiment for Kavya that I'm super pumped about, where I'm trying to do that little ping-ponging that I talked about a moment ago by merging live action and partially AI-generated imagery and motion to make like this test music video. And I'm by no means a filmmaker, but it's in these moments of freedom where I can do anything, where I dabble in something I've never done before, and it's like such a thrill. Like I can't wait to flesh this out and make a bunch of other footage, that I feel quite at peace with the fact that I'll always have a hard time with introducing myself like I did 10 minutes ago, like what I do, who I am. And in the face of all the messaging I feel like I was constantly receiving in school from professionals, the industry, that I should focus and like do one thing and find that thing, I can now say I feel pretty happy being a sum of parts. So thank you for listening.